What's up guys, it's our Chili. My neighbor is an old lady. She comes outside once in a while to chat with passersby and garden. The first conversation she had with my dad, she complimented the painting he has hanging in his bedroom. No big deal, she probably saw us moving it in, or glimpsed it at some point before we got curtains. But then she meets our dog and says, well, he's much scarier through the window, isn't he? Again, NBD, we know he has a habit of pushing aside blinds to stare outside. She comments on things like this often, asking us why we didn't walk our dog that morning or when we got a new sofa, but she's just an old lady, right? She's probably bored and outside a lot. Then she meets me. She swears she's already met me, but I had never seen her before in my life. She asks me how I like my room and tells me about the girls who had it before me. Weird, but okay, she rubbed me the wrong way, but I don't really mind, she's fairly easy to avoid. Or so I thought. As I was taking the dog outside, I happened to glance over and see her staring at me through the window. She lowers the blinds when she sees that I saw her, but is peeking through them watching me. Later, I go to the kitchen and see her again watching me very intently through the window. Our blinds were slightly open to let light in. Then upstairs in my parents' room, there's a window in their bathroom. I see her again as I'm replacing the towels, watching. The more I looked for her, the more I saw, she was watching basically all the time. Not only from her window, she sits in her car and watches us from the street. She sits on her porch and watches. She slowly walks down the street and watches us literally all hours of the day. And she does it to her other neighbors, and she did it to the people who had our house before us. Everyone knew to keep your blinds and curtains shut at all times, otherwise you can guarantee she watches you. It freaked me the hell out. Recently a friend and I were swapping our favorite horror movies. We were childhood friends that grew up in the same Detroit suburb. I was thinking about an incident that had happened when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, 30 years ago, and she says out of the blue, I don't know if you remember this, but the police started patrolling our neighborhood when we were in 2nd or 3rd grade, because when I was walking home from school, 2 men in a blue pickup truck rolled down the window next to me, and said, hey girl, you need a ride home, and one tried to grab me. I took off running, tearing through yards, and I told my mom, who called the cops and walked with me to the bus stop after that. I confessed that I was thinking about a time when my cousin Sean recently passed away, so he's been on my mind. Also, he was really smart, much smarter than I, and I were wandering around the neighborhood like kids did in the 80s. This blue pickup truck pulled up to us, and one of the 2 guys asked us to hop in for a ride. Sean said, no thanks, and instructed me to sneak into a neighbor's back porch, luckily unlocked, and stay down. I whispered, I was afraid we would get in trouble for not asking the neighbor for permission. Not the brightest kid, I would rather die than break the rules, I guess. And Sean goes, stay here and hide. Act like we went inside because we live here. One of the 2 guys got out of the truck and went into the yard to look for us. We laid low. About 15 minutes later he left. I look back on it now and think, what a close call. We lived near the area of the Oakland County child killer, though in a much poorer neighbor than he targeted, and I've spent the last few nights reading about the case and thinking about that blue truck. A guy followed me home from the train station once. I think he still knows where I live. I got out of work and was waiting at the train station. I had my headphones in and was staring at the TV with the arrival/departure times. This guy suddenly appeared out of nowhere, got really close to my face, and asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said nothing and walked away quickly. He smelled homeless and had these big, crazy eyes that were darting around the room as he spoke. He also had an erection, and had gotten so close that he'd spit on my cheek. There are weird people at train stations. Whatever, I'll never see him again anyway. Move on. After I get off the train, I take 2 buses and walk a few blocks to get home. I was focused on the podcast that I was listening to and wasn't paying attention to my surroundings. All of the buses were also very crowded. When I reached my stop and started to walk home, I noticed that the creepy guy got off the bus behind me. There was nobody else around, so ran home. When I got to my door and started to unlock it, he was standing at the end of my driveway. I was crying and fumbling with my keys. Then some of my neighbors pulled up in a truck, and I screamed, "Hello sir, help." Then the creepy guy turned and walked away into the woods. I called the police, but they didn't show up for a while. They had me write a statement, but seemed uninterested. My husband left work early and came home. We saw the creepy guy lingering around the neighborhood and walking past our house a few times in the following days, but he eventually stopped. Haven't seen him since. I've had a creepy coworker follow me all the way home. It freaked me the hell out. The worst part of it was that most people didn't believe me. This is a guy who would just stand in the doorway of my cubicle, enough that I got a rear view mirror for my computer monitor, so I could see how long he stands there without saying anything. He did it a lot, and would stand for minutes without saying a word. Just watching me. Sometimes he would ask me questions, like what kind and color of car I drive, and then would say, "I'm just asking because I thought I saw you the other day." In hindsight, the questions don't seem so innocuous. So, when I looked in the side view mirror of my car, a block away from our apartments, and saw his face, I was in shock. I couldn't believe he'd actually gone that far. I was on the phone with my husband and told him what I was seeing. I thought I must be going crazy, so I continued on to the apartments while watching him to see if he followed. Sure enough, he followed. Followed me down a street that was merely an entry point for a small neighborhood and my complex. It isn't used really for anything else, and I knew whereabout he lived, so I knew he had no business being there. I turned into the complex, and there he was right behind me. My building was located in a really squirrely part of the complex, way at the back but in the middle, so you had to drive a circuitous path to get there. And he was behind me the whole time, so I didn't go to my building. I passed the turn to go to it and booked it around to the complex exit and tore down the street into the neighborhood, turned around, parked at the end of the street, and watched the complex exit to see if he would come out. I mean, maybe he was visiting someone who just happened to live there. I kept telling myself that. But, nope, there he was. Pulled right out of the complex and drove towards the direction of where he lived. I told my boss the next day, totally freaked out. She kind of believed me. It sounded absurd, but she knew I wouldn't make it up, but no one else in charge did. They handled it appropriately at my job and all, but they couldn't really do anything. They could only counsel him on the harassment of watching me work. It scared me, but I wanted him to know I knew and wasn't going to put up with it. So, when he approached me and accused me of being rude to him, because I had refused to speak to him ever since that day, I responded with, "I saw you." He said, "What do you mean?" And I repeated myself. He just turned and walked away. I've had other people stalk me and or my home, former homeowners with mental problems, but this one was just too close. It's terrifying to know that if we weren't as observant, we could have had a much different ending. Myself and 6 friends, aged 18 to 28, mixed European group, were on a 5-day river canoe trip, up a tributary of the Orinoco, around Merida in Venezuela in 1998. Our guides were an older, 60s, rough-looking German guy, and a slightly younger but shifty-looking Orinoco Basin Indian. One of our group knew fluent German, but for some unexplained reason, didn't share with the guide that she could speak it. Later told us she didn't want the creepy dude making comments to her that no one else could understand. We were 3 days in, roughing it in hammocks on the side of the river, not having seen a village for at least 8 hours. The guides kinda kept themselves to themselves after dinner, which was fine, but this evening they were a bit further away and we could tell they were having a pretty heated discussion in a mix of German and local dialect. Suddenly, the German girl in the group turns white and looks terrified, and it takes us few minutes to calm her down. She explained she heard the German guy talk about making sure the others will be at the place and they will have the guns, and that the crocodiles will get rid of the guys and the girls will go with them to some village the day after next. We kinda freaked out, but decide that being alone with these two dudes days from anywhere in the middle of the fucking rainforest, we were pretty much trapped. We decided on a plan, which, fortunately, went our way. Early the next day, we decided that the next time we saw another canoe expedition pass us, we would essentially shout and scream at them that we were being kidnapped and needed help. Fortunately, a 4-canoe group came past and we enacted our plan. Our guides immediately just got the fuck out of there, didn't even protest about our crazy accusations or anything, other than to pull a sawn-off 12-gauge from under a blanket and point it at us to stop us chasing them, which kind of validated to us that they were planning to kill/traffic us, and they didn't hang around to get caught. We got taken to the nearest village a few hours down a branching tributary, where we explained the situation to the local police and some soldiers that were on exercise or something. Turns out there was a suspected serial killer operating out of the Maracaibo area targeting tourists going into the forest, active since 1996. I was never able to corroborate any of the info we were told by the police using any Western media source or internet searches. We still occasionally email each other about our close call, but it's been 20 years and we've moved on with our lives. I've never told family or my wife, and I don't think anyone else ever told more than a handful of people. This is actually kind of embarrassing, but anyways, last year I was watching my parents' house while they were out of the state. They live on a wooded plot of land, and have been known to have trespassers on their property. I got home one night at about 11 p.m., and I'm standing in the foyer, and the way the foyer is I can see into the kitchen, which has windows. The only light in the house is the moonlight coming in the windows. Against the light I can see the silhouette of someone standing there. My heart immediately started slamming against my chest and I ask, "Who's there?" No answer. I ask again, and as I'm asking I'm moving my keys that I was holding into the spaces between my fingers so I had a weapon. Again there was no answer. I start moving and the figure starts moving too, exactly the same way I was. I put 2 and 2 together and I flick on the lights and I see a reflection of myself in the mirror that's in the foyer. I was 12 years old, and we were 3 kids sharing 2 bedrooms. So my dad decided to put up a half wall to make a third. If I stood on my bed I could see into my brother's room. We were young and used to throw a ball over before falling asleep. One night I was just drifting off when my mom taps me on the shoulder and says, "What are you doing?" I thought, that's a very weird question, obviously I'm sleeping. So I turn around to answer her, only it's not my mom. It's not a person, it looked like a 3D shadow of a man, just black. I screamed while my eyes were closed, the figure disappeared. My mom and dad came running into my room. I tell them everything. They think it's just my imagination, but tell me if I'm scared to go sleep in the room with my brother. I tried to sleep but I was shook. My brother woke up once to go use the bathroom upstairs and I pretended I was asleep. I didn't want him to know I was still afraid. I hear him go into my room, right next door, climb on the bed, springs, and then just stopped. I thought he was trying to purposefully scare me, so I look up to show him I'm awake, and see the figure again. Arms crossed with its head resting on his hands. Even though it had no facial features whatsoever, I knew it was looking at me. I try to convince myself it's just dark, it's my brother playing a prank and I'm seeing things. Then I heard the toilet flush upstairs. It was just that one night. I never saw anything like it again, or even close. But years later, in my 20s, I was living alone and felt the tap on my shoulder. "What are you doing?" "I'll stop there cause you'll think I'm crazy." But that was the last time I heard it. And I'm 31 now. It's not a ghost story. I will remember that day until I die. I've had issues with sleep paralysis my whole life since I was very little. The way my sleep paralysis manifests is that I'll go to bed, have many dreams, what feels like a full night's sleep, and then I'll wake up. I'll wake up in whatever room I fell asleep in, but something feels off. That's when I realize there's someone there, in my room, watching me. It's not always the same, usually a man crouching in the corner, a man leaning over my bed, someone running their hands over the top of my body. When I was little I would try to scream out for my dad but nothing would come out. Just my breath. I can see the man and he's staring at me and I'm red in the face trying to scream but all that comes out is a breath. Then I actually wake up. That's when I realize I wasn't awake at all before, even though I'd been 100% sure I was. So this has plagued me my whole life in this same pattern. Wake up, feel dread, see a man. Try to scream, actually wake up. I even started to get a little more used to it, and could recognize earlier what my tell was that it was all fake so I could calm down and wake up. Halloween night 2015, I come home with my friend. I lived with 4 other girls and a roommate, but tonight my friend is staying in my roommate's bed. I've been asleep for hours when I start to wake up, because I feel something touch the foot of my bed. I open my eyes and I see a man crouched down at the foot of my bed. He's in all black, with a hood over his face, tied tight, with dark black sunglasses, so most of his face is obscured. I recognize immediately that this must be my sleep paralysis acting up again, but I'm scared so the attempt to scream comes out before I can process it all. Except this time I hear this god-awful, blood-curdling scream. It sounds like a woman being murdered. She's screaming and it won't stop. It took me a while to realize I was the person screaming. I've never heard myself sound like that before. I didn't even recognize myself. Just terrified. The man sprinted away, slammed the door, and I heard him run back through the house. My friend in the bed next to me is sitting there silent. The house is silent. I felt like a helpless child again. I turned to her and said, "Is this when you call 911? She didn't answer. My hands are shaking when I'm calling, and I don't really remember much now. I know I started crying on the phone with the operator, because I was afraid he was still in the house or had killed my housemates, because none of them came running. The operator told me to lock my door and not to leave the room until the police arrived. I don't know how long it took, but the sun came up while we waited. When I saw them out the window I went running outside screaming and crying to the police. The rest of the story is pretty boring. He stole my neighbor's bike, and the police never caught him. They found the bike though. I went to a therapist and it didn't help at all. She would say things like, "I bet you were really scared, huh?" Yes, I was. That's why I'm here. She gave me like a week's worth of lorazepam and told me to go home. I took 3 of the pills at once and just laid in bed awake and shaking all night. Didn't work for me at all. Started sleeping in class, started missing notes. I'm better now but I've given up on sleeping well. I have to get pretty fucked up if I want to fall asleep, so I usually get pretty fucked up. I can't sleep next to people because if they move I wake up and if they talk or touch me I'll scream. But I don't really think about it anymore. This was roughly about 3 years ago. Now to preface this story, I am not a believer in the supernatural, occult, magic, etc. My best friend, however, does. This is not fake, I did not make this up. Where I grew up, there's a road called Indian Cabin Road. It's a long road that intersects several other roads, eventually going from pavement to dirt after a bit. You eventually end up near a river and another town, but for a while you drive through the woods with no guidance except for the dirt road, since no phones get signal out there. Now being from a small town, every kid knows about it. It's almost a rite of passage. I 100% know that if I were to walk up to any local at a Wawa and ask about Indian Cabin Road, they'd immediately say yeah, that place is haunted, and leave it at that. So anyway, my best friend and I decided to find it and drive down it the night of Halloween. After searching our maps and finding the street it forked off of, we drove down in her Caprice, thinking all the while, why the fuck did we choose the worst car in the world to go off-roading? She's a firm believer in the supernatural, so the whole time she's playing up the fact that it's Halloween and we're driving down the most haunted road in our town. I'm rolling my eyes, trying not to laugh, because fuck it, it is Halloween and I might as well enjoy the supposed spookiness of it all. We end up driving most of it without realizing it until we reach the part where the road is essentially a dirt pathway. Not even 10 minutes later, my friend inexplicably stops her car and says that she doesn't want to drive down anymore because her car can't handle it. Before I can even reply, I hear her say horse opera. What the fuck is that, in the most bone-chilling, terrified voice I have ever heard in my life. In the tree line there's what only I can describe as this spinal, skeleton thing staring at us with glowing red eyes. It was on all fours, but its body was stretched out so that its back legs were bigger than its front. It was pitch black outside at this point, but both her high beams and headlights were on, so I am 100% certain it was not a human in a morph suit or an animal, or anything in between. It stared, this inky biac creature, and started to move towards us. Now in high stress situations, I usually end up laughing to calm my fears, and at this point I started chuckling, telling her it was just a wolf, that's it, nothing to be afraid of. My friend immediately booked it out there, repeatedly asking me what it was and what was happening. All I kept saying, all I could say really was, it's just a wolf, it's just a wolf. I was legitimately scared, and to this day I have no idea what the fuck we saw. We haven't drove down there since, and my friend repeatedly brings it up whenever I mention I don't believe in the supernatural. I hope you like this video. For more content please like and subscribe.